Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another exciting episode of Paratopia. I am Jeremy Vaeni. With me is, of course, the incomparable Jeff Ritzman.
Hi.
And our guest today is the likewise incomparable doctor. That's right, we have suckered in a scientist, Tyler Kokjohn, to the show. We said last episode that, or at least I did anyway, and then I somehow suckered Jeff into going with it. That, maybe it would be good to have on some sort of doctor, some sort of specialist in the brain to talk about memory. And who better than a man working on curing Alzheimer's disease? So, Tyler, are you there?
I am.
Excellent. Welcome to the reboot of Paratopia.
Thank you.
Yes. Tyler, you remember Jeff. Tyler.
Oh, hi, Tyler. How are you?
Hello, Jeff.
Good
remember, we did
see
Project
you
Core
again.
together, right?
Right,
Yeah,
right.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, there's that. Jesus.
When we were scientists and young. So, Tyler, pretty much what we were talking about, did you get a chance to listen to the episode?
No, I haven't listened to any of the new ones.
That's right, because they're not out yet.
There we go.
But so we were. It just struck me finally, after however many decades of looking at, visitor phenomena, that there is a disconnect between feeling as though these beings that seem to speak in our minds or with us telepathically or something along those lines, that they know us better than we know ourselves, or you can't lie to them. That whole sort of thing. And the fact that, we were talking about Jeff's shrouded person, that's on the one hand, and on the other hand, he didn't realize that the fabric of his garment would scare Jeff because it would remind him of the blanket that he was covered with in childhood. So if you're inside someone's brain and you know all this other stuff, how can you not know that? Is there a compartmentalization of types of memories that this might actually be a clue that they can't read certain types of memories, or no?
Oh, that's a toughie. You can have really good, strong knowledge of a subject or a person, for example, but not necessarily everything will be at your fingertips instantly at every moment. A lot of our memory is context dependent, and so you kind of need prompting. So you could say, well, that's just something that perhaps slipped the entity's mind, or it had to be prompted in a slightly different way. Think about reminiscing with friends. That memories or events that you've forgotten about, someone recalls, and then all of a sudden, you have a flood of recollections just after a little bit of prompting.
I'm thinking about it now. Was there more to that?
Well, I would say that you couldn't automatically reach some kind of great deduction by the fact that the entity perhaps forgot about something or didn't necessarily know something at the moment when the event occurred, like touching the fabric or whatever. And it's like, oh yeah, I forgot about that. So maybe that's evidence they're human too.
Well, what about things where we, and again, this is, of course, already a big assumption that there are beings at all, and that it's not some sort of masquerade of beings. But just in reading about, these older cases from the 60s, where people would see what looked to be a craft on the side of the road and beings, working on it or doing something, milling about, and then suddenly they become aware of these people and scoot away and zip off into the sky. If these, again, are psychic beings, is there anything just in the brain that you know about that would make sense of not being able to hear people creeping up on you, but still being able to read their minds? Is there something in there that we even know about that we could even turn on and off like that in terms of, I don't know, the possibility of connecting with other people telepathically? Is there an on-off switch, for instance, with any of these newfangled devices that they're coming out with that can sort of interact with your mind via the computer?
I think one thing we'd have to assume is that the beings that we're talking about from the past, the ones that were doing things, were capable of telepathy. And maybe that's what you discovered, that no, these guys weren't particularly skilled at that. And that's perhaps why their craft broke down and had to be working on it on the outside. I don't know. We shouldn't assume all are necessarily equivalent and all are necessarily omniscient in every regard, every facet of things that over the time, we've seen as a spectrum of stuff happening. So I'd say maybe not all of them are quite as good at this as others.
Well, can you also just flesh out
Can I jump in just for one thing here? Just to interject something. There is a thought here to put out to the notion of them knowing us better than, or it knowing us better than we know us, and therefore somehow being able to anticipate some kind of action or response. And I think maybe it needs to be looked at that they can maybe define some kind of parameter of how they believe you will react, but in fact, the choice hasn't been made yet. And I think that I'm sitting here listening to you guys, and I'm thinking about what's the variable in that equation. The variant in that equation would be the choice that you end up making in that defining moment. I think you can hedge a bet on what someone's going to do. Are they going to turn left or right if something jumps out in the middle of the road? But it's really just hedging a bet. They're right-handed. Chances are they're going to pull to the right. They're left-handed. Chances are they're going to pull to the left. But in that moment, that choice is a split-second decision, a split-second reaction in your mind, in your brain, in your neurology, or whatever you want to call it. That would be the only variable that I could see that might force their hand into an unknowing situation. Okay.
Let me flip the question to the so-called other, the enigmatic other. If these beings, if there are beings that interact with us through the years, and people react similarly, as sort of scared animals, that type of thing, we read time and time again that the beings seem to be startled by this or put off by it in some way. Is there anything that you can think of that would be missing in their brains compared to ours, that it would never imprint on them the repeatability of our fear?
Oh, I think everything would be missing. They would have to be doing some research. Remember, they're from in principle, whole different worlds, so we don't know all that much about one another. And so it's a learning environment for them is how I would look at it. That, they're testing, probing, discovering all these interesting things.
Yeah, but if you were working with a lab rat or any sort of lab animal, which I don't recommend, by the way, in this day and age, Tyler, so stop it, please. But if you were, wouldn't it be pretty obvious after, say, the first, 100 times that a rat flinched, that a rat is going to flinch?
Yeah, you can get a good sort of set of overall, I guess, parameters as to what you think will happen. And that's part of the power of observation in science, is it gives you some predictive power. But every now and then, just like Jeff said, they fool you. One of them pulls something, they make a break for it, and they're going down the hallway before you realize what they've done. So
if these are real beings from somewhere else doing a study, I'd love to know what they're interacting with, that they're surprised that we're afraid. Like, what else are they picking up that's like just fine with what they're doing?
Well, if you think about it, on this planet, if you go, for example, out into the ocean, you pick up a sponge, you don't get too much reaction. And some of the fish in the sea are pretty oblivious to us being there. Insects, for the most part, don't really pay too much attention to us unless we anger them, for example, like bees or whatever. But so I think it's, just looking at biodiversity on Earth, it would be very possible if someone were say, cataloging life throughout the universe, if they had the ability to travel different places, that they might discover a whole host of responses and ranges of responses that we've hardly even thought of yet, because we have quite a number here on our planet.
Well, just in terms of human memory and the human brain, we've heard over and over, of course, now that it's not compartmentalized. For instance, when we would talk about hypnosis, one of the criticisms we'd use against hypnosis is that memory, you can't just pick it out like a program in a computer and reactivate it through some sort of trance state, because it doesn't exist in the brain that way. Then how does it exist in the brain, and why is it that you can remember anything correctly at all?
Well, that's a central question that people are really trying to get after. The encoding, the physical encoding, is something that just baffles us right now. There are some areas of function that we understand. For example, muscle memory and sensory areas in the brain we can map with some precision. But in terms of like, okay, this memory of this person will be in this spot, no, not quite so much. That they seem to be rather distributed. Again, you might refer to the idea of contextualize, that if I started to ask you about work and people at your work, you would start thinking about perhaps the location and people you interact there with at work. And so you've got that kind of context. Relatives would be something else, and then those memories would be connected, perhaps physically close, but we're not sure necessarily in the brain. But context does seem to play a role when you're searching, when they're going through. Now we're talking declarative memory, facts, and then episodes, for example. Episodic memory is a little bit different. But there's just so much that I can't tell you about how it works. There's so much yet to be defined. And one of the things you need to watch out for is we're trying to do that, but right now our models are really simplistic. And so these companies, like there's a company called Cephalon, there's another one called No-Lie MRI, and they're looking at how brain areas light up and say, okay, yeah, that person's lying because of this pattern. And oh man, there's an awful lot of risk in that. We just don't really know how the thing functions all that well.
So is that a case of just the technology is too young, but they're rushing it to market because it's something new? Absolutely.
And so it's the modern lie detector is what it comes down to. Will you be able to use it in a court of law? Well, I think someone like Barry Schenck would love you to try that, because this is the lawyer that defended OJ and was involved in the conception of the Innocence Project. It won't take him very long to take that apart. Trust me.
Well, it's interesting to hear you, who works on this, to say we don't really know that much about a lot of this stuff, and refreshing in a sense, because I think like I'm guilty of what I've been accusing ufologists of doing, which is not keeping up with the latest research on hypnosis, so they're not aware, so they end up defending frauds and not knowing it. But similarly, I mean, I only read bits and pieces of science, so I'm sure I read the holographic universe, however many decades ago it was released, and read about splitting the rat brain into different sections, taking pieces out, and the rat could still run the maze, therefore memory is holographic. And so I read that and I go, oh, that's really cool. That must be the thing. But that was decades ago, and I haven't kept up with the research. I was just enamored with the cool thing I read decades ago. Has there been new research on that? Have they been able to yay or nay a holographic property to memory in the brain?
I think the answer is nay, but there may be people who are still trying, and I'm not really exactly sure where that lies at the moment, to tell you the truth. But I'll just warn you that when we look at our model systems, rats and mice in particular, not everything translates. And so some of the stuff and abilities that they have, running mazes, for example, they're not really quite the way a human would do it. And so we're looking at this and saying, okay, this area of the brain is analogous to that in a human. And so therefore, some of those therefores can be more than a little bit risky. So caution.
And then when we talk about, memory, again, not quite knowing where all of this stuff is stored, how it's encoded and all that, that's something that people who want to preserve hypnosis in the UFO field take and use against you and say, well, see, they don't know everything. Therefore, at any moment, it could turn out that hypnosis does retrieve memory. Do you think that is possible or probable?
Well, I don't think it's probable. Let's say, for example, we accept that as a possibility. Legal systems have kind of frowned on the use of hypnotic regression as a means to recover actionable evidence for trials, for example. But if that be the case, then we ought to be able to do a lot better at finding corroborating information from hypnotizing people and showing like, okay, yeah, they remembered X, and then we can go out and find X. And I'm not seeing a whole lot of that. And I'm not seeing a groundswell of data that suggests that regression has a great deal of really strong ability to develop things that we couldn't find through other methods, okay, or wouldn't be knowable through other means.
Well, what have you found that is the best, maybe 1, 2, 5, however many you can come up with off the top of your head? What are the best ways to jog your memory? If you have a so-called missing time episode, or you just had an experience in childhood that you've kind of forgotten the details on or you're hazy about, are there any methods or just what is the best sort of common sense way to get at that memory?
If you want to go back to your childhood and recall things, one of the best and most striking is often a photo album. And going back and just flipping through that, long forgotten images. And you can find that you recover stuff that we're wired to remember pictures pretty well, episodes like that. You're talking about, training memory. What we often train students to do in medicine is to story the information and attach it to familiar things or odd stuff like weird organisms, microorganisms that cause disease or whatever. We tell the story of the organism because those are remembered a lot better. And so if you have a story, this is the reminiscing part and going back and forth. We already talked about reminiscing with friends. So little conversations, and then you get a little snippet, and somehow that can unlock something that perhaps you wouldn't have done spontaneously, but somebody has opened this up in the context of a past that you share, and boom, you're off to the races and things come pouring in. So in terms of things like traumatic stress, post-traumatic stress disorder, sometimes people report having strange associations, unexpected associations, for example, smells, and boom, they're back in the jungle in Vietnam. So a guy will smell canvas and it'll remind him of his jungle boots or the tent or whatever, and boom, he's right back. And so we get some links that perhaps you wouldn't really expect. And I don't know how you would come back to prompting those, but photographs and stories and reminiscences, those are pretty strong.
So essentially, you're recommending things that are emotional triggers.
Oh, there's nothing better. Yes, if you have for whatever reason, when there's an emotional context to an event, those are well encoded and remembered. And perhaps now this is just speculation, but perhaps evolutionarily that was an advantage. If you had a painful experience, then you'll remember it. You're not likely to repeat it. You learn quickly from those. So we seem to be wired to recall trauma.
Yeah, well, it also, from all the data that's coming at us in every direction from all of our senses all the time, it seems that you would need something to point out what's the important information, and what better way than, these emotions we have, something that impresses upon you in urgency either way. Be it joy or danger.
Or that hurt.
Right. Yeah.
I should attend to that. But one of the things that you mentioned is we have all this information coming in. If you go ahead and you test people, I think we talked about this once. The idea of the invisible gorilla, that we don't attend to information very well, and it's actually very easy to distract people. This is the thing that the magician counts on, is to deflect attention from what he or she is doing to fool you. And we don't attend to everything. We think we do. We think we're really good at it. But it's amazingly easy to get people to focus on the wrong thing and then pull something strange. So
yeah, and didn't you even tell Jeff that peripheral vision is better than your vision right in front of your face?
It can be if you're looking at, for example, stars in a telescope, that you can actually see the kind of off to the side. Your vision is a little more acute, and so they're brighter as opposed to this thing immediately in the center of your vision, which is kind of interesting.
So when people report peripheral vision phenomena, does that hold more sway with you as they're actually seeing something?
No, it does not.
Why not?
I would not evaluate one as superior to the other. I would say, no, we got to take it on the merits. It's possible that something was misinterpreted, and I think the center of the visual field is a little more important in terms of actually focusing on things. The periphery is good at motion. So I don't know that we could say one is better necessarily than the other or more reliable than the other. One thing that's interesting is people are very good at picking up a little bit of motion. We're pretty well adapted to that, and that could be, again, survival value.
Jeff, I have a question for you, which is similar to showing people a photo album. You've recommended bringing witnesses back to the location where they think something has happened. Have you ever brought someone back and they thought something had happened to them, but it turns out it didn't? Or it turns out that they couldn't figure it out because they didn't have an emotional attachment to the place. In other words, if emotions are the important factor,
right?
Could that be a tell that nothing happened?
I don't know. I don't know about that. I don't know that I've ever come across that bit of it. Have ever taken somebody somewhere that they claim something happened and nothing did? Yes. Very long time ago. And I'm trying to remember the details of it, but essentially the guy had an accident. I mean, it was an accident, and he was unconscious, rendered unconscious for a couple of hours, I think. And it was by his own doing. It wasn't anything that had done, nothing had done anything to him. But he had seen an airplane or something, and then something had happened where he'd run into a tree or hit his head or something. It was in the dark, and he was knocked out. And when he came to, he was on the ground and didn't remember what had happened. And the guy called me because, like I said before, apparently my name was in a book somewhere, and asked me if I would help him. And I said, well, sure. And that was the first thing that we did, was to go out at about the same time of day or night and walk the path, and it literally walk and retrace the steps. And that's really what you have to do. And I think the other big thing to do is to get somebody comfortable enough with you to take those steps, because that's not exactly it's not easy to gain people's trust these days. But I think it's important to not just say, oh, okay, I'm here, come on, let's go, but rather to go in, to talk to them, to make them feel comfortable with you, which I don't have any doubt that probably. I hate to mention the two, I don't know, the two nasty lot, but Hopkins and Jacobs probably went through something akin to that, some kind of introductory period where they weren't doing anything with you other than talking, which makes the defenses lower, makes you more comfortable, and makes you more apt to in other words, the more comfortable you are, the more easy you are to let go a little bit when you're walking the path of something that you thought happened or retracing your steps. You can focus more on that than the somebody that's there watching you that you feel is analyzing your every motion and every move. So I think it's important to get that person comfortable and then take them out, let them do all the talking, let them remember as they get to the spot. And I've gotten...
Do they?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Has anybody ever not? Has anyone had such a block?
Oh, yeah, sure. Well, I mean, I have not ever had anyone not come back with, in other words, to leave the experience, to leave the area where something happened. I can't remember if there was, but I have a feeling there might have been one or two. But out of, a lot of people, everybody comes back with something more than what they left with, that they recall. It might not be the experience itself, but it might be, I did walk across the basketball court, I did cross that sidewalk. I thought I didn't make it that far, but I actually did get there because I remember the light being there and so on and so forth. So yeah, you do get something, but it's not always the totality that you're hoping for.
Right.
Because as I've said before, I think a lot of times when we don't remember things like this, I don't force that. I think that's I not only do I think it's an impossibility to force memory, accurate memory that is, but it could be detrimental to somebody, to their very well-being, to remember something like that's being I don't know, either forgotten, as Dr. Lilienfeld told us on the program that we did with him. It's just about impossible to say, well, my mind blocked it out. That just doesn't happen. You know what happened. It's a denial internally that keeps you from remembering things like that. You don't want to remember, therefore you don't. And so I think forcing that, it can be detrimental.
Well, these people that you worked with, I mean, you're not bringing them back to their beds, right? I mean, they must have been somewhere else while they're having these events, in other words.
Well, I mean, what I do is I ask them, I get a detailed information about where they were, what they did, so on and so forth. But yeah, often it has been just going to sleep.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. And to that end, I've gone so far as to stand in the doorway while the husband and wife get into bed, and I reset the clocks to around about the same time, turn off the lights, and let them lay there. And on one occasion, the husband fell asleep, which was great because it actually worked, because his snoring set her off. The minute he started snoring, she started remembering stuff.
Oh, God.
And she's like, you know what? And boom, she was just about off to the races. She remembered at that point that something walked through the wall, which this was a woman of, I think she was 82 or 83. And she says, it walked right through the wall. And I was like, okay, all right. What walked through the wall? And again, she couldn't remember what it looked like. She just remembered something literally ebbed through the wall. And that was brought on by her husband snoring.
Huh. Tyler, as you're hearing this, does it sound like the type of amnesia that you've studied?
No, it does not. I will tell you, though, if I had to make a list of 8,000 things that might prompt a recollection, husband snoring would not have been on the list. I mean, this is the kind of the fascinating thing that you find as you begin to delve into this. The one thing I would say is what we're doing is we're thinking about memory and we're expecting everything to work as kind of we understand it to normally function, but we're really talking about people that are in a bit of an altered state. Uh-huh. And I think, that's one common aspect, that they're either under stress or something's gone on. And so I'd say I agree with Dr. Lilienfeld that, you don't block memories, but in some of these conditions, we may not quite have quite the normal sort of garden variety function, and some things just may be gapped that we wouldn't expect.
It's not there at all. Yeah.
It's not there at all. I mean, we'd have to accept that as a possibility, that we're looking at a really abnormal situation and then trying to bring it back to what we are familiar with. And so there's a little bit of risk there.
Well, let me just ask real quick. How does memory in amnesia come back to you, if not the way Jeff just described?
Well, in some cases, if there's organic damage, it may never return. So one of the really important cases was a patient who was known for years as HM, and it's Henry Meliason. He just passed away not too long ago. And he had the antegrade amnesia almost complete. And what happened was, to cure some seizures, they removed parts of his brain, including the hippocampus and the area around it, the entorhinal cortex, that we now understand is very important for mapping and consolidating memories and even finding them again. So he could remember a lot of facts and things. He was well educated, a young adult when this happened, but he was in the now. He could not encode any new episodic memory. So literally, I'm not kidding you, he couldn't find his way to the restroom. And so he spent basically his whole life in an institution. The reason being is that they would show him where the restroom was, and then 5 minutes later, he couldn't remember where the restroom was. He could never consolidate those new memories. So we had, that's an organic cause. And in that particular instance, that was lost for him. His life, in the way that most of us live it, was never to be recovered.
Jeff,
Tyler, what if any experiences have you had in the use of sodium pentothal?
None. In terms of applying that to a patient, or
yeah, I mean, I'm just wondering if something like that, or if there are any drugs that ideally it's not the optimal way to go, but if somebody has something that's, getting it missing time, I think is a mistake. But let's just say the field does not want to hear that, and is there any kind of drug that can be administered that will prompt something like that to happen? Or will sodium pentothal bring back memory? Is that what that does, or does it not do that?
The classic true serum thing would be you have somebody who's withholding information and you want to loosen their inhibitions. I can tell you I've had a slightly different experience. When I was in graduate school, I was a bartender. And there's this drug called alcohol.
Right, yeah.
You give it to people, and they will tell you stuff you cannot believe after they've had a couple of belts. Yeah. And so, it does lower inhibitions, and you can get information out of people. So, I've had that much experience to know it's like, whoa. There are times when you just want to say, I don't want to know anymore.
Right.
With these people, so.
Yeah, well, something like that kind of goes back again to what Dr. Lilienfeld said about hypnosis was, the equivalency of somebody being drunk would be the equivalency of doing this.
That's actually my interpretation, and Dr. Lilienfeld's far more expert on this than I am. But any deep relaxation technique where the person becomes basically not on guard. Yeah, it has the potential of getting a lot of interesting information from them.
Have you seen the recent article that I just saw, I think today or yesterday, about the man who literally went through most of his life with not much brain at all in his skull?
Yes.
Okay, let me just ask this, and I know this has damn little to do with anything directly that we're talking about tonight, but when we start cutting pieces of the brain out, does the brain rewire itself essentially on the fly to make up motor functions, memory? They didn't say this guy had a fantastic memory or a high IQ. They just said he lived and he functioned with little to no brain. His cavity was largely empty. So with something like that, that obviously was either some kind of affliction that he got. But what about cutting out huge chunks of brain tissue? Does this stuff rewire itself on the fly to accommodate for that?
It turns out over time, we've learned that the brain is a lot more plastic than we had thought a few years ago. And indeed it can. And one of the things it can do is areas that are not being used can sort of be co-opted. For example, if someone becomes blind, Parts of the occipital lobe, for example, might be co-opted by other senses or taken over. And so if you could restore sight suddenly, you might find it doesn't work so well because the nerves are busy doing other things. But one of the things that we've figured out with time is that the brain is constantly forming new connections, new synapses. Those that aren't used die away. Those that are strengthen. That we do have a great deal of plasticity. So for the traumatic injury patients, it would really depend on how the injury occurred and what exactly was taken out as to how they would function. So a good example would be stroke. The neurologist can look at a stroke patient, look at the signs and symptoms at bedside and figure out pretty well where it is, and then also how likely they are to recover. And some have a much better prognosis than others is the best way to put it. But yeah, I mean, there's lots of interesting stories. Maybe you've heard of Phineas Gage, and he had this was one of the classic things. He was a worker, railroad worker, 100 years ago maybe, and they were tamping explosives into a hole with the rod, and that went off unexpectedly and rammed the rod basically through his jaw and up into and through the top of his head, and he kind of disconnected part of his brain, and his personality. He lived, but he was a very, very different person because he kind of cut the frontal lobe off from the rest of the brain. And so that puts the brakes on things. That kind of keeps you sane as a human. And he became a very, I guess, troublesome and quarrelsome kind of guy after this, where before he was sort of a model citizen.
Right.
So, yeah, it repaired itself, but he didn't come back quite the same.
Does it always go that way when people have mental or brain, organic deterioration? Do they become worse, quote unquote, worse people, or do any of them ever go good?
Well, it's hard to know. If you talk about Alzheimer's, that some of the patients become very agitated and difficult, and others just sort of are much quieter. Others, there's a rarer dementia, but one that shows up in younger people called FTD, frontal temporal dementia. And those people tend to have very, very peculiar behaviors, kind of antisocial behaviors that sort of reveal them to have problems. So it can, it definitely can happen. I'm not sure it always does. I mean, I don't think that.
What about with comas? Do they generally, if you have a personality change coming out of a coma, is it an antisocial one generally, or can it go the other way?
I don't know. I'm not aware of anybody who has come out and said there's antisocial behavior associated with it.
Oh, because I had a friend who was in a coma, and when she came out, she was a different person, and she was not pleasant to be around, and lost her artistic ability and all this sort of stuff. Sort of lost her talents and her.
Now, why exactly was she in the coma? Do you know?
Yeah, because she was slammed by a car.
Oh, okay, so trauma.
Yeah.
The recovery, the damage, they can survive, but it may not be quite the same when they come out. So.
Yeah, it's weird to me that, I've mentioned this before. It seems like people who, maybe have stuff like this, but certainly people who are mentally ill or bipolar or that sort of thing, they seem to do bad things as opposed to gardening. No one's ever chronically gardening. They're always killing people, or you don't want to bump into them on the subway or something.
Well, okay, but we may have. This is what I would refer to as cherry picking. You may hear the bad ones. You may the more.
Well, you think you would see them. I mean, I lived in New York for 15 years. You think you'd bump into the crazy superhero, but it never quite works out that way.
Well, maybe they're just quiet, Jeremy, and you don't notice them. Okay, you haven't really done a scientific sample, so we're not clear on this.
That's true. What about muscle memory, or not muscle memory?
Yeah.
When emotion gets trapped in the body, and people talk about emotion that way, and so to deal with a psychological issue could actually, for instance, help your back if you've got a bad back, or things of this nature. What is the interplay between how memory is stored and that.
That's interesting. Certainly, emotions can express themselves physically and very profoundly. So you can get tension in your back and have all kinds of pain. I think actually, at least way back when, sciatica, the back pain that radiates down your leg, was for a long time referred to as middle executive's disease, because you found it so commonly in these guys. And there were certain physical aspects to it, but part of that was probably stress, psychic stress. And so, these things they do play out. They do take a toll.
But I mean, just in terms of memory, how we study memory and trying to figure out, where is it located? How is it encoded? Are these studies involving the entire body? And, let's even take it a step further. When the indigenous people talk about coming from the heart, or meditators talk about dissolving the ego, and then there's this sort of blissed out, essentially the equivalent of coming from the heart. You're coming from someplace else in the body that for some reason is associated with the heart. Have there been studies about that? What is it about coming from the heart as opposed to the brain? Are there memories stored there? Is there something else stored there that informs the brain?
That's the tough one to answer. There aren't a whole lot of studies. There are some. For example, if you do the sort of classic mindfulness meditation, or even some hyperventilation exercises, it looks like we can actually get a biochemical analog of oxidative stress dropping down, which is kind of interesting. But in terms of memory play in that, I don't know. I'd have to actually see if I could find something. That's something I've never looked at.
What about, and of course this is probably as pseudoscience as it gets, but it's all I've got, which is when I let my meditation energy go and I hook up to an EEG and it reads that a delta wave state, that I'm in deep sleep, but you can talk to me and the body is moving around, but it's not my own conscious will moving it around. Does that say anything to you? What does that mean, that my brain would be registering deep sleep while I'm clearly, hyper awake?
Well, we see the trained practitioners are able to affect these very deep concentration states at will, and we can get a handle on that with some of the EEG data, for example. So we know that this is a real possibility with meditation. What it means in terms of function, not clear. And the thing you have to keep in mind is that the EEG is a big average of millions of neurons firing. And so we have these waves and back and forth, but what it really means in terms of like local function, there's something that is referred to by neurologists as the default mode network. And that is kind of like if you're not really thinking or doing anything, you're still getting neurons firing back and forth. And so it's possible that what you're doing is you're clearing out thought or whatever. You start to see that. And so maybe that has a more rhythmic facet in the EEG. But I couldn't tell you, oh yeah, that's what you're seeing here. That's what this means. It just is not clear, at least as far as I know.
Well, would it be a good hint as to what's going on with all of us if you can bring a dream state into consciousness? Doesn't that go a long way to explaining how you're seeing things in the room other people aren't?
Very likely. I would say. I mean, maybe some other neurologists would disagree, but yeah, I mean, if you can induce an altered state, which is really what is being done by a skilled practitioner with meditation, and maybe not even so skilled, then you would think that, okay, what we have are people that are just more adept at doing that. Just a little bit better at bringing on the sort of conditions that are favorable for seeing these things.
So, but essentially it would be living in altered state, right?
It would. I mean,
if I walk around and I've got these two deep sleep and wide awake going at the same time, it's not as though I'm going from an awake state to a sleep state on command. It's both are open at the same time. So what is what does that mean? What does that imply? I mean, what is that? But somehow I'm not schizophrenic. I'm not walking down the street talking to people and hallucinating that way. I seem to be able to function. So is there something that science is missing when they talk about altered states or hallucinations or any of these things as neurological phenomena, as opposed to, I don't know, seeing more of what's actually there?
Well, there's a lot we're missing. And if you read Oliver Sacks' book, Hallucinations, you'll get the idea that people are very diverse in things that they see and recognize and do. So I'd say, yeah, in one regard, yes, we still don't quite comprehend a lot. And so in the human condition, what would constitute really being kind of out there, and that would be, just like you described, people who are demonstrably psychotic, for example. And there's probably a large number of us that fall somewhere to the other side of that spectrum and have interesting experiences that they don't even talk about, don't even think about.
Jeff, do you have anything before I attack science?
Yeah, am I here? Tyler, we have the EKGs for heart patients, right? That they carry around on a belt, reads on like a ticker tape thing.
Sure.
How close are we to getting something like that for the brain?
Oh, we have like the EEG that Jeremy has is pretty easy to use. It's, you plug it into your computer. The EKG is a little bit better because you can just download the data. It's pretty convenient. It's routine. But we're not that far. What I would come back and tell you is, though, EKG's heart rhythm, immensely simple compared to what's going on in the brain.
Right, sure.
And so the specialist can look at those and go, oh yeah, I got AV block here, and so this is happening, and that's not working right, and this is out of whack, and can diagnose very accurately what's happening with that data. Not so much with the brain. It's just it defies easy explanation.
And I guess the question, of course, the reason I'm asking that is because if you've got an experiencer who's in the moment, having these extraordinary experiences rather often, you could certainly hook something like that up and monitor brain activity. And that way, if anything does happen, you've got something. But then again, people would say, well, anytime you monitor it, it's not going to happen. And I could argue that's because they're getting into a routine before they go to bed, and routine breaks this cycle of things.
Sure.
But barring that, is there or are there any, and this may be a real stretch, and I just don't know because I have no idea where the technology stands for something like that. Is there anything that's either implantable or something that wouldn't come off that basically would require nothing more than, a Bluetooth connection to your machine to literally live feed to a data center or live feed to a monitoring center? Is that around, or is that not around yet?
Well, we can do sleep studies. We do those routinely,
right?
And to see how the person's breathing, and we can detect REM activity, those sorts of things. So there's quite a bit that in principle could be done. They're not particularly, the sleep studies, for example, are not particularly onerous, but you have to go to a place that's set up for them.
Right, yeah.
EKG,
I was going to say that's done in a lab, right?
Yeah, and the EKG you can wear at home,
right.
And turn it in. But these are technically interesting problems, we call it. It'd be one of those things that you really would have to push the technology or be able to acquire the technology in a way that you could use it. And I don't know how that would be easily done.
Yeah. I don't know what kind of data sets are involved in or how big the data would be for something like that. But in other words, how fast can it transmit, out of the room, which I think is where any of this has to be, is out of the room. If you're going to collect any kind of data on that sort of thing. I mean, people have tried the camera route. They've tried the sound route. They've tried so many things to try and get at this. And you hear over and over, and I mean, skeptics will call it some kind of excuse, but over and over you hear that either they got up and turned the camera off and something happened, or after 30 days of nothing, after 30 days of reviewing footage of somebody sleeping, and then they get up and turn the camera off, say, well, something happened, and I haven't looked at the tape. You look at the tape, and they get up and switch it off.
Yeah.
Or the camera just stops working. I mean, Jeremy and I and a couple other people did an investigation at Gettysburg. I had a camera in a back room, and about 3 o'clock in the morning, as usual, something happened in that back room. A fully charged camera with boatloads of media to record on was turned off. And so you've got this electronic equipment failure type thing. Yeah, I'm always trying to think of what is a definite way to get at this. And one of the last ways I can think of is some kind of implanted chip that would then automatically just Bluetooth out the data so that it's out of the room. It's, or something like that. I'm actually kind of surprised that doesn't exist yet.
Well, I can't say that it doesn't exist. I'm not aware of anyone using it. And so maybe one of your listeners would know of studies. I haven't heard of them. This is a little bit out of kind of the realm of sort of like the AD world that I spend most of my time in. But have you had a chance to read the new book by Olette?
I'm just starting it now. I'm literally
and he you probably want to.
Well, let's tell the audience what that is. It's Eric Ouellette, and the book is called Illuminated, and we're all reading it, and hopefully we'll get him on the show. But there's a lot of food for thought in this book.
Yes. And so one of the problems, I'm very early into the book, but one of the problems that he's discussing is this very thing of you would like to go after these phenomena, and lo and behold, you just have all these mechanical difficulties.
Right.
And it's sort of like the nature of the beast, I guess what George Hansen would call the trickster, and sort of things that kind of go along with this frustrate us. But all you can do is make your attempts and hope that one day we start to understand like how to not have things fail, or maybe we'll be lucky and we'll get a little piece of data we didn't have before.
Yeah. Well, I think it's gonna wind up being an entirely new kind of technology that's going to have to be able to be implemented in that way. It's not going to be film media. It's not going to be digital media or digital HD or any of that. It's going to be something else. And I sincerely believe, and people can say what they like, I sincerely believe that it's going to take AI technology to get there. And that's what I'm waiting on.
I think, there's something to that, because if it was a simple matter of simply having a video camera, we would have this solved basically by now.
Oh, yeah.
And I can say like, okay, one person getting up and turning off the camera, all right, maybe there's something going on. But hearing the same story over and over again is just kind of interesting to me. Like, oh, come on now, they can't all be in on this.
No.
So
I mean, there's some pretty freaky stuff over the years that I've personally seen in regard to that, but it certainly seems to appear on demand in certain cases, i.e. being far away, being distant, keeping its arm's length at you. It'll certainly appear at that point. And for lack of a better way to put it, I mean, I think I showed everybody on Facebook the lights from the hallway.
Yeah.
It wouldn't show up to me looking down the hallway standing there, but by God, when I put the camera around the corner and started clicking, there it is. And so, what's the message there? Don't look at me. But I mean, either way, I think it's going to take some kind of new technology. And if this stuff responds only to, well, I hate to use a term such as soul, but soul or spirit or meat, which to me are going to be the three pieces of whatever it is that's interacting with us. Okay, so let's put an AI in your computer that has a lens that sleeps like anything else, but is very sensitive. And if something walks in the room or something disturbs the air, it wakes up. It doesn't say anything. It just wakes up and realizes what's there. And you're talking about an intelligence that thinks and computes and all of these things that we do at the same time. And so you wake up and you go, hey Siri, did you see anything last night? Well, yes, at 2:35 a.m. something entered the room. It wasn't the dog, it wasn't your child, and your wife was asleep beside you. So I have no answer for that.
I'll just make a confession that these kind of situations are kind of what I live for. Okay, I mean, now you got something going. And there are a number of different protocols that we could employ to see if we could tease out something. So, I've got my little interval camera that I absolutely love, and you turn that sucker on and let it take a picture every minute. And it can do that, or it can have a motion sensor on it. So there's lots of approaches, but how in the world do you explain that you can't look at it, but you can stick your hand around the corner, and of course then it doesn't know what's happening.
Right.
Which drives skeptics wild, but okay. Well, let's work with it.
Yeah. So is it responding to meat, or will it not respond to, what I'm saying? Like it'll respond to meat, no, you're not going to see me. In other words, the neural network is broken. So you stick this dead object around the corner as a camera, and it says, okay, that's fine.
No. It doesn't like eyeballs, Jeff.
Well, okay. It doesn't like eyeballs.
The Paratopia logo eyeballs. Scares it.
Right.
Okay. Yeah. It knows what you are.
But here's the thing: if you're going to talk about trying to capture something, I've seen these ghost hunters use essentially laser grids, and their method of thinking is that they record the laser grid with a camera. And if something breaks the laser grid, you would certainly see it. I mean, if you walk across it, it basically puts the grid all over your body and makes looks kind of like a wireframe model of you standing there.
Sure.
And so when you've got something like that, of course, the kill factor that is that there's a camera running. And so, is there a way? Again, is there technology out there that could record? And there's got to be. Because we have digital thermometers, okay? So they gather data from a point in space, in 3D space, that a laser is aimed at. So if we can determine temperature through that, then we can certainly say, did anything break the beam? And if so, can we duplicate that in a 3D space on a computer? So again, you're talking about light, and light seems to have a definitive effect on this phenomenon in one way or another. So if you're going to try and capture something, again, I'm asking this to anybody out there who's listening: is there a grid system laser that can recreate, its points in 3D space as they're interrupted and record that onto a screen? I don't know, but something like that seems to be very interesting to try and tease something out. If you're looking for different ways to get a hold of this thing in some kind of qualitative way.
Yeah, if you had Siri hooked up to a 3D printer, how awesome would that be?
Well, yeah.
I don't know what it is, but I've modeled it for you.
Right, yeah, exactly.
This was in your room last night.
Right.
And it's Bigfoot.
Hey, I'll take it.
Yeah, I mean, look what they've I'll put it to you this way. Look what they've teased out, really hard to explain in conventional ways, as to what walked through the room at certain times of the night that they were only able to see because there was an IR illuminator in the room, and it appeared on film. So, okay, if we can get that, then we can get more than that. I'm not asking for a bit slice. All I'm asking for is, okay, we get it. We get it. You can take night vision and use that to your advantage. Great. Now what's next?
Yeah.
That doesn't seem to have filtered down through any paranormal discipline at all. There is a next step. It's just, where do we want to take that? How do you want to try and qualify what you're seeing? You've got to get something on it, and rather than just imagery, you need to get some kind of weight and measure to that. And so far, nobody's really doing that.
The thing that I would say is that trying a variety of approaches is critical. And maybe crowdsourcing it and asking for help would be one way that you might be able to make some progress. But I still say, if you've got this occurring on a regular basis with some predictability to it, you've got half of the battle right there. and so you can just keep going after it.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I just want to throw this out there while it crosses my mind. Back in the late 80s, early 90s, people didn't want this stuff. They didn't want the alien experience at all. And I think most of the group meetings that I went to, the main point of discussion or the main thought after sharing was, okay, how do we get out of this? These days, I don't know if that's as widespread as it used to be. I think more people have embraced the enigma enough to want to question it. And while they still fear it to some degree, I don't know that they want to get out of it as bad as they used to. At least that's my sense from talking to people these days. And that could be a byproduct of a number of things. But all that aside, one of the things that I heard over and over and over, group to group, before an internet, was that people had great success at getting a good night's sleep and not being disturbed by this by running a plasma ball in the room at night. And so when you're talking about one of these plasma balls, Tyler, I don't know if you would know what kind of field that puts out and what effect that may have on the brain. Or if anything like that's ever been tested before, like plasma effects on the brain. To your knowledge?
I'm thinking that I've only seen one, and I thought that there was a surface static charge from it. Mm-hmm. Am I correct on that?
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
But I don't know about electromagnetic radiation from that would have any kind of measurable impact on neurotransmission or the brain. That's something I just have to look up. But that's the only thing I recall is that you could get static, and that's largely surface effect. So it's not going to be a deep thing like a current.
And I mean, if that's the case, then you should be able to run your goddamn dryer and keep aliens away. So
and maybe that would work if you drag it into your bedroom.
Right. I mean, we're sleeping it. The
equivalent could be on the audio side. White noise. Lots of people like white noise. They sleep really well with that. So.
Yeah, I don't. I don't at all. No, but I think that's that's really what it boils down to is, and I think some people need to just take the technology that we already have and kind of try and implement it in different ways. Just trying to get a handle on this in different forms. I mean, we've got the cameras. We've got the heat sensors and temperature gauges and static charge and electrical, vibrational pulse stuff. I mean, we got all that, but there's got to be different ways to implement this. And I don't say that necessarily all of these things wouldn't be commercially viable to use. I mean, how great would it be for an electrician to be able to see the wiring in a house just by setting up a laser in the room and running a grid? Something like that would be immensely successful, I would think, for large scale projects. So, if you make some of this stuff, audience, if you're in that field, then certainly some of that stuff could possibly be utilized for this.
Sure. Yeah.
I mean, a
wires, right?
Yeah. I mean, a K2 meter was, for the ghost people, is like a big invention. And the thing that's been around for years is an electrician's tool. So There you go.
Well, I would say the other thing to keep in mind is that we may, I think almost certainly would find that there won't be one tool that suddenly solves it.
Right.
That it may take cobbling together data from a large number of attempts and methods and things and saying, okay, now if this is true, now we have this hypothesis and these things should hold, so let's go test it. And that's one of the things that we really haven't done is sort of hypothesis-driven investigations to see if EMF really tells us anything, to see how reliable EVPs are, that kind of stuff. People believe in them, but we don't really have, I hope I don't make all your listeners angry, but not a whole lot of sort of like cleanly hypothesis-driven hard testing.
Everybody's familiar with the entity case. I mean, in that case, they brought the woman to a controlled environment, and phenomena still happened. They still recorded phenomena. The pictures are all over the web if you look it up. And so I wonder what different about that case as opposed to just about every other case I've heard since then, because we don't hear a lot about people being brought into a controlled environment and monitored for all night for a month. We don't hear that because, number one, nobody's got the money for that. But I think even if we did have large, substantial amounts of cash, I still think the paranormal community would see fit to make another movie than to put that into practical use in a lab setting. So, I mean, that would be my big question to all these fields is why isn't more being done in that direction rather than another book, another movie, another tour?
Well,
I'm just throwing that out there.
That's where the money is, man.
Right. Exactly.
Okay. The real money.
I just wanted to get back to the plasma question of how it interacts with the mind. Because, Tyler, I think you were saying we don't have studies on that, and I'm just wondering then why it is basically the central conclusion of the Condign report, which is the official UK UFO study, that plasmas are the culprit behind UFO sightings and occupant encounters. And they're basically saying there's some sort of plasma phenomenon that if you get within a certain radius of it, it can cause hallucinations. Is that not based on some sort of scientific study? Is that just out of their butts?
Whoa, I like how you put that. Yeah, you'd have to take a lot on faith there, wouldn't you? You have a phenomenon that's episodic, difficult to study, and so we presume that it's, okay, let's make the assumption it is plasma. Yeah, if you have an intense enough field, Michael Persinger and others have shown that you can basically do interesting things to cognition. But we're making a lot of assumptions that, okay, this follows from this, from this, from this, and everything in the chain that we say is correct. And so if you wanted to take that on face value, yes, you certainly could. In terms of rigorous hypothesis testing, you have a hypothesis without data. Basically, you have some episodes that are consistent, what scientists would refer to as anecdotal data, okay? And now you're going to have to bring it home to really convince me. So no matter how good the logic, got to have a little bit more than that. Philip Klass was of the same opinion. Plasmas did this, and I guess great minds think alike. So,
Jeff, did you have more before we were rudely interrupted by technical issues?
No, that was pretty much it for me.
Oh. Okay, well then, Tyler, I'm going to berate science, and I want you, I want you to still love me. I know you're not so much as a physicist as you are a medical biologist?
Sure.
Okay, but go with me down this road. Now, I enjoy science for its it gives us tools, obviously, and it gives us an ability to articulate life, the universe, and everything in, probably better ways, or at least different ways than we're used to. But I've, as you know, have always harped on the sort of religious nature of it. And a lot of people say you can't equate it with religion. But I give to you Exhibit A. This is a quote from a TV show called The Inexplicable Universe with Neil deGrasse Tyson, Season 1, Episode 4, Inexplicable Physics, and this is how he ends the segment on string theory. And I quote, "Now there's not a shred of evidence to support this idea," he's talking about string theory, "nor is there any proposed experiment that can test it within the foreseeable reach of modern technology. But I'm okay with that. I'll overlook that shortcoming for now." End quote. Is that not belief?
Yeah.
Didn't he just say creationism?
Well, now, isn't this a sort of an extension of the situation in physics where they're talking about some theories are just too beautiful to really test? That they're so wonderful, they're so elegant, they're so all-encompassing in their own little way that we don't have to test them. They're just magnificent on their own. And that's kind of what I think he's saying, is that what we have are mathematical theories that literally don't take us anywhere in terms of reality, a hardcore confronting data with actual numbers or reality. And I think most scientists would say, okay, yeah, that's fun. That's a great exercise. Now let's get back to something that's real, that can help improve our condition or improve our knowledge.
Now, to be fair to the good doctor, he did stutter his way through that sentence, I noticed, and it was pretty obvious that he was stuttering through it, and one could interpret that to mean he didn't really believe what he was saying or didn't want to really say it. And I saw like a cell phone cam, a piece of a conference or something that he was at where he was doing questions and answers, and someone asked him about string theory, and he said the opposite of what he's saying here, which is basically, look, they haven't come up with any evidence for so many years. I'm getting sick of waiting. How much longer do they need? So it's possible that this is just something he was forced to say for a television show, but it did have his name on it, so I don't know why he would be forced to say anything like this.
Yeah, I would think that he would not be in that situation, but okay, maybe.
But then the other thing, I was watching Real Time with Bill Maher this week, and he had on Neil deGrasse Tyson, and he had on Richard Dawkins, and I think it was in Overtime, their little Overtime show that they put on YouTube, where the two of them were together and talking about the significance of water on Mars. And, Neil deGrasse Tyson is just talking about, well, if there's microbial life on Mars, then we know that there was some sort of meteor or asteroid bombardment way back when of Mars, and so it could have flecked off pieces of Mars, which could have flown toward Earth. It could have essentially seeded Earth with life. That's panspermia, and that's probably what happened. That's probably how life comes to be. And he's saying this as if scientists have always said this. But am I wrong in thinking that panspermia was always one of these like back shelf theories that nobody really talked about, and now it's just being spoken openly about? Like, yeah, planets can seed each other like pollen, and the whole universe is alive.
Well, ideas do have an ebb and flow, that they come into favor, then they kind of fall out of favor. I think the first person that really, in the modern era, who really formulated the idea of panspermia was Fonte Arrhenius, the guy that kind of started a lot of chemical ideas, such as acidity, for example. And that was over 150 years ago, or over a century ago. And then it kind of would die down, but then other data have come forward that have been very interesting, beginning really, I'd say, with stuff like the Murchison meteorite that fell in Australia, where they found amino acids, and then later they were able to confirm in other sightings or other findings that, that they really are in these meteorites, and that begins this process of speculation and bombardment. And then you can take it to the extreme with the idea of Hoyle and who's his I can't remember the guy's name. Chandrasekhar or something. I'm sorry.
Ravi Shankar. Yes, go on.
No, not Ravi Shankar. But anyway, their idea is very extreme and not accepted by mainstream scientists at all. That diatoms and influenza and things are raining down on us all the time. I don't think we have any real strong evidence for that. But the idea of panspermia has had a revival, and the idea that Mars and Earth might intercommunicate with meteorites back and forth has got a big boost a few years ago when, I don't know if you remember, Bill Clinton announced the Allen Hills meteorite maybe had small microfossils in it, which was since disputed. But people have gone back and thought, this is a real possibility. So it's not like it's always been there, and it's certainly not without controversy, but it has been around. The problem with panspermia as a theory of life is that what it does for us here on Earth, if it rained down from elsewhere, it still does not describe the genesis elsewhere. That we're putting off the central question of how did life begin and saying, well, it happened out there.
But what it does is it makes us start to think universally and start to think in terms of a larger ecology in which we're embedded.
Yes, no question.
The web of life is that much bigger, and gets back to, hey, here we go, star nations, right? All the indigenous people around the world saying, energy from another place comes here. The Hawaiians have it in a canoe. I'm sure the Lakota have it a different way. But whatever it is, science will have it as panspermia. Aren't they all saying the same thing?
In a way, Carl Sagan said we're all star stuff. And in a strict term, that everything basically beyond helium was built in supernovae, and distributed, blasted across the universe, and it all got reformulated, re-put together into us.
So is science actually saying anything that we don't know, or is it just putting another language on things that are common wisdom amongst people anyway? And it's just if you ignore them and go, well, we discovered it first because we put it into this language that's hard for you to say out loud without an education. Is that cheating? That's not really... Like in science, like I was watching, what was it? The Physics of Light, this PBS special. And the very first thing they did was talk about relativity and all this, and then say, and of course, nobody understood this before Einstein and company. But then, of course, I flash on Teokasin telling me of what he had read in Einstein's biography about Einstein going to the Hopi tribe and saying, these children will understand relativity before my colleagues will, because they already get it. It's already in their culture. So is there, do scientists ever parse out what they're actually discovering versus what they're just putting into different words, but ignoring from people that they've considered to be lesser than the conquering culture?
Oh, I suppose there's some of that. I think though you'll see that a lot of times when they are kind of putting stuff in context, they go back and consider the mythology. When the nuclear bomb was exploded, Oppenheimer was basically, I think, intrigued by Sanskrit, and so he began to talk like, I am become death. And so I'd say that they don't always necessarily discount everybody else and bow only to themselves. And I would hope that by and large they would not. I'm not saying that there certainly aren't people that probably have no respect for anything in every profession. But
what, because Oppenheimer suddenly became a Sumerian god in his own head? Is that what you're saying?
I think honestly, Jeremy,
become death.
Those guys, yes, they had realized when they had the Trinity explosion, the first successful test of the nuclear weapon, that they had really, really changed things. And I think that probably a lot of them had deep regret, very deep regret. And then they could no longer control it.
Well, even the water on Mars thing, if we step away from indigenous examples, to me is an example of something. I mean, we've been talking about canals on Mars, and sci-fi writers have been dreaming that Mars had water forever and ever. And astronomers had been saying, no, that's not true. And now here it is. So put these two things together for me. I mean, I assume that this discovery of water doesn't actually have anything to do with what were perceived to be canals on Mars way back when.
Right.
But, does that speak to you of something, of some sort of connection that we have with Mars? Especially if you're going to say, well, panspermia, well, then we literally have a connection with Mars. But there's something about Mars that's always been the go-to planet for life, and for not just life, but life that is us, that looks like us, that obviously drinks water. I don't know. Yeah. Like, what is that? What is that? If they literally don't have a connection, if the canals thing was wrong, and yet there are canals, is that just a lucky coincidence?
Well, remember the canals that Percival Lowell were misapprehension of features on Mars, and then unfortunately connected to artificial structures by mistranslating some terms used by an Italian astronomer, Scaprielli. And that kind of led us to Lowell's theory of Mars as the abode of life. That book is still in print, by the way, that Percival Lowell wrote in 1895. If you want to read it, it's his sort of take on the situation. But the whole idea of Mars as possibly like us is because it is the planet most like Earth. And when people look at it, they could see these dark areas that would seemingly grow bigger in the Martian summer and recede in the wintertime. And so it was logical to assume those were plants responding, to the seasons. And so we have all these kind of natural connections that make it quite fascinating. And so we're drawn to it. You have to realize, though, that the water that's been found, there actually isn't any. What they have is the possibility of water being there. They have seen things that are consistent with water flowing from the tops of mountains and craters and whatnot. But they have not conclusively proved that there's liquid water there pooling yet. It's just the hint. And look at the excitement from just a hint of water.
Well, something's making the ground dark.
Exactly. You can, everything, it's very intriguing, but we're, not quite there. And man, the NASA is all over it. Of course, I don't fault that. That's what they do.
Well, you gotta riddle me this, and I know, maybe you're sick of even talking about it because we've talked about it privately and I blogged about it already, but I just find it fascinating that, is no one in the media asking this question? Is no other scientist even aware of this conundrum of they send a probe to Mars to look for life. They find signs of life, perhaps water, and then they reveal to us that by international law, they can't get close to it for fear of contaminating it. Therefore, they'll never be able to know whether they found life. So why did they go to Mars to find life in the first place, Tyler?
That's a good question, isn't it? Might want to check your blog.
No, I did. I saw your response to that.
Okay. That's a wonderful question.
But our listeners don't read, Tyler, so
okay.
So enlighten them.
So the quick synopsis is that actually this very issue it has been covered. It was covered very quickly in the journal Nature, and I think I have the links in the comment that I made to that article. But one of the central questions is, there are rules, regulations by international treaty that certain areas will not be visited by probes that haven't been sterilized to the highest level because there is the possibility of forward contamination. And that would kind of ruin everything if we brought microbes there on one of our probes. And one of the really interesting things is that some of the probes that we have sent after Viking in 76, the only one, by the way, that actually looked for life on Mars. The other ones have done slightly different missions. Those probes were clean but not sterile. And so we have actually contaminated small parts of Mars. We don't know what the consequences of that would be. Hopefully, nothing.
But when we drop a probe, a rover down on the soil, we don't know whether there's life on that soil or not. We're hoping there is so that it can scoop it up, right?
Well, at this point, the rovers that we have, no, unless there was something like lichens or had a real structure to it, it would be kind of tough to see, although we do have one that has got a pretty good microscope and can drill into rocks. But you're absolutely right. We're hoping that we don't get into places we shouldn't be. But I'll just tell you that what was the purpose of going to Mars in the first place? I think we're going to answer that very question very quickly. NASA will have to devise probes that can sample those places with water. They're going to have to. The public will demand it. Congress will demand it. Else, why did we go there? And I have every faith that they'll probably be able to do that in such a way that we'll be able to answer the question without having gross contamination interfere. I don't know about the legacy. I'm sure that they'll make every effort to keep the area pristine as they possibly can. But
because we have such a great track record with that.
Well, I have every confidence that they will do absolutely the best job that they can. I just can't guarantee it. I'm not sure anybody can that we wouldn't end up forward contaminating it. You want to think about it. One of the things that's really interesting is I think it's Curiosity in the Gusev crater may be just a few miles away right now from a spot with water. in principle, just a few miles away.
I don't understand why they're worried about contamination when the very climate on Mars is overage to what we would do in the way of sterilization on this planet.
Yes.
I mean, what would survive at minus 195 degrees Fahrenheit? I mean, really? So I don't understand why they're worried about contamination if there's nothing there to contaminate.
That's the $64,000 question that some of these brine lakes or places where the water does pool at times are warm enough to have liquid water for periods of time may have a relic life there. And
no, I mean the probe itself.
Oh,
I mean you're talking about a hard metal object, right? Which it's not real conducive to germs, correct?
In theory.
Okay, and so we've got minus 195 degrees, and at night, can plummet to 100 degrees below. So that's beyond what we would consider here to be a sterilization process, correct?
Oh, not necessarily.
So there could be things alive on our probe on the surface now that came from here.
Yes.
That's what I'm asking. Okay.
Yes. There were.
So wait, could they turn around and accidentally find those and be like, look, we found life?
Oh my God, Jeremy, you just hit the death scenario. Absolutely, they could, and that's why you have to be so careful about how you go about this and making sure that whatever you do to touch the soil you're going to take is as clean can be, and you take every possibility that you can to make sure that no contamination gets in there. You test everything, you double test it, because you do not want to have this momentous discovery finding that what you really got was Staph aureus from some technician's nose in Florida.
I don't know how they're ever going to do that.
It's going to be. I'm telling you, it will be an immense challenge. But I'll also tell you that they are, unless I don't understand anything, we're going to sample those spots. We are going there somehow. We may not send the rovers that we have now. We'll send something cleaner and better, but we will go there.
See, what would really be the freak show is if that somebody here had a cold. And so we then seed the planet with cold people. What happens if there's some kind of slight primordial soup missing one ingredient, and we provide that other ingredient, which leads to a whole nother creation process going on.
Okay. We are, obviously we're speculating, and conditions are harsh there. There's no doubt about it. One thing that the Viking probes told us is that the soil chemistry is really, really reactive. Mm-hmm. And so, on the surface of Mars probably isn't a good place to be. But
well, I think we've seen life finds a way, don't we? I mean, don't we know that now?
It's amazing. Absolutely amazing. But I can tell you that, how we store cells in the lab for long term? We freeze them in liquid nitrogen.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And then you pop them out, you thaw them out, and it's like nothing happened. They're perfectly happy. Right. And some of these extremophiles, oh my God. I was telling students that one of the things we're actually talking about this week is food poisoning. And you have to break the sequence of events that lead people to get sick. And I said, wash stuff down the drain, whatever. They like that. Okay? They love that. They love being in your plumbing. And their philosophy is, hey, just give me a chance. I'll show you what I can do.
Right.
Well, the other thing I thought was interesting, sort of on that note about their impervious to death, was that Neil deGrasse Tyson on this program was talking about tardigrades, your favorite, Ellen Tarr's favorite, in that they're pretty much impervious to death. They could travel through space, in the dead zero of space, get here, and still be alive.
Sure.
But he talks about this, and then they show the tardigrade swimming around and doing its thing, and it already looks like an alien. But he's talking about this as if, like, with the tone like this probably happened. Probably. I mean, if there's water on Mars, then this probably happened. So it's like almost, if people always talk about the media in Hollywood giving you this sort of slow disclosure through entertainment, but here's Neil deGrasse Tyson, and I'm not saying he sat in a room with people and said, let's come up with a way to desensitize people, but I'm saying that incidentally, through the way that he is just casually discussing things that he has never, to my mind, openly talked about as viable options before, and now just treating them like common wisdom. I mean, he's basically saying aliens are already here. They're called tardigrades.
And let's not forget that if you watch that program, you saw that Neil deGrasse Tyson is unbelievably overly excitable. So let's take that into consideration, please, because I mean, a lot of the things he said you couldn't possibly take seriously, but as joking things that he was saying about, I mean, there's a lot of that, and he is really overexcitable when it comes to. He gets very animated when he talks, but. I mean, it is true. There are so many germs. There are so many microbes that we didn't even know about 15 years ago. Correct me if I'm wrong, Tyler.
Yes.
Right? I mean,
Absolutely.
So the idea that these things could exist on Mars is like not that big a stretch, and it's also not a big a stretch that there may be a water bear on Curiosity right now. I mean, that's entirely possible. And so, what is that doing on Mars, and what's that going to be, or what's that going to turn into? The fact of the matter is, if something has landed on that planet and has touched that planet from this planet, it's already too late. We've already infected Mars.
Well, strangely enough, that may be what we find when we get there and we start to look at, let's say we find microbes and culture them, and are reasonably certain that they came from the soil. Let's say if we're really lucky, we'll find a lot of them present in the soil, and we can say, yeah, this is representative of what we're actually finding there. We could, when we take them apart biochemically, say, oh my God, they seem to be analogs of what was on Earth, which would then be strong evidence for panspermia, at least local panspermia.
Right.
And so that's a possibility.
But what Jeff just said is kind of just strikes me as it gets to, like, again, a sort of an arrogance of, we're talking about we don't want to contaminate this planet with anything, but we are the contamination. We're going to keep going back. So whether we sterilize our equipment, it's our equipment. It's us that is there contaminating this planet, right?
Well, I think if and again, you can't project the future here, but if NASA has its way, in around 20 years or so, humans will go to Mars. And then, really all the clean probes or whatever in the universe won't matter, because when humans are there, it's a whole different world. And we are surrounded, all of us, in a cloud of viruses and microbes. And everything we touch will, in fact, get some degree of contamination. There's no workaround for this.
Well, Tyler, when you talk about us going there in 20 years, don't you think that the first step is going to be to send a probe there that will send something back here?
Well, this is actually a good point. There have been sample return missions proposed for a long time, and that actually is extremely problematic, because you could scoop something up and bring it back, but then where do you wish to study it? Because we don't want to contaminate it, and we don't want it to contaminate us.
Yeah. I mean, we can't even take a cactus out of Arizona. You're talking about bringing something from Mars to here. I think that's an extraordinarily bad idea.
It will be very difficult, but I'll just tell you that what we have to work with is the idea that in the near term, and with political realities and expenses being what they are, that might be the most expedient, reasonable way to get a sample back in our lifetime. Mm-hmm. And so I'm going to guess that for once, the International Space Station would have a mission, and that could be it.
Yeah, so that'd be okay.
The odds.
Keep it off planet, please. I mean,
well, it's interesting. Okay, I mean, you're going to get these arguments that, not to worry. There's nothing there that's going to be a problem, and probably that's right. But the reality is that whatever comes there, if it is truly unique, is unlike anything that we've had experience with. And I can tell you that the recipe for disaster is to have like a new flu virus that nobody's seen.
Well, let's be really succinct about it. If it can survive on Mars and be resistant to Mars atmospherics and pressures and temperatures, then when it gets here, it's a field day.
It could
be.
Yeah.
I mean, that's really the reality of the situation, is that we're bringing something here that, is like an Arnold Schwarzenegger Terminator virus.
Well,
Hey, I came from Mars. You have no idea how great it is here, or it could be the reverse. We could open the, we could find out some sort of leaf or plant, or plant on this planet, bring it back here. I mean, that would be great, right? And you open up the box and it dies instantly. I mean, that could happen too, but
sure. This is the thing. We don't know.
Yeah.
And so it's, I think that the odds are that we'll find a true human pathogen laying around up there pretty low. But we need to start with caution and be sure. And again, it is novel, so we don't want to find out the hard way.
Yeah.
And
I just might want to point out that the moon, when the guys came back from the moon, they were quarantined for a number of days to make sure they didn't bring anything back from the moon.
Yeah.
So, I mean.
Okay, you want to hear something better?
What's that?
This is actually known. When NASA and others began to study microbes in zero gravity, they found out that the bacteria, the microbes that they looked at, prefer that. And they grow really well up there.
Right.
And so that could be interesting too, as you start to, assuming that there's viable stuff that we could culture. What happens in space may not quite tell you what it's going to do on Earth.
Right.
Yeah. Isn't that interesting?
Wouldn't panspermia lessen the odds of us not finding a human contagion on there? I mean, if our DNA came from there?
Yeah, if over the years we've kind of had everything go back and forth that could, sure. I'll just tell you that humans haven't been on the planet all that long. And so maybe that's okay. Maybe we're roughly in stasis. I don't know.
You find it odd that the movie The Martian came out like the same week?
Well, I tell you, I suspect that they couldn't wait to get the water announcement in at just that propitious moment. But that's just my naturally cynical nature.
I like that NASA announced they were going to make a big announcement on Monday. So it's like it was such a huge life-altering announcement that they decided they could take the weekend off and just not announce it.
Well, the NASA has had these instances of pre-announcing, and and so they've found fairly big things. But I don't remember the last great one a few years back, 4 or 5 years ago, I think maybe, when they found the bugs that ate arsenic, lived basically in arsenic and didn't have the sort of like normal DNA that you would think that, and the thought was they were substituting arsenic in there. That was quite an announcement, and it created quite a furor. And but they pre-announced so that everybody's ready for the big announcement. They don't know what it is.
I wonder if people like Dean Radin, maybe Jeff knows the answer to this. I don't know, but when they do like sort of psychic random number generator type psychic experiments, and they claim that it spiked during right before 9/11, and you hear these sorts of things. Do they include the type of data like we were just talking about, the fact that we've been so focused on Mars, canals on Mars? Nope, they're not real. Well, what about this face? What about these pyramids? Well, that's all tricks of light and shadow. But then they find life on Mars. It's microbial, or perhaps water and microbial. So is there, does that speak to some sort of psychic overload where we intuit something life on Mars, and then we go bananas about it and we overblow it and overstate the case and try to imagine giant civilizations and stuff, which don't exist, but we were right. There was life on Mars. Is there not something to that?
I don't understand the question.
It's as if like something gets into the psyche saying there's life on Mars, and then suddenly we, for some reason, from all corners, from science fiction writers to astronomers to whoever, start going, oh my God, I see water. Oh, I see a face. I see a pyramid. Oh, there is a civilization. And, scientists go, no, there is no such thing. There is no life on Mars. But then, like within a decade, they discover, oh yeah, there is life on Mars. But it's not what you thought it was. It's not that overstated case of a giant civilization with pyramids and a face. It's just microbes. So, are these things going together in some way? Are we predicting that we're going to find life on Mars by hyper imagining, life already being there?
We need to have Dr. Kreipel on the show for that.
Really?
Well, yeah, that's his whole thing. That's his whole thing. Yes, that's the whole thing in a nutshell.
Huh.
Yes, that art imitates life, but it's the opposite. Art creates life. Art creates the reality. That is the entire ball of wax in that respect. Yeah, I would expect to see quite a lot of that in the book that he pens with Whitley. Because that is really, I think the two past books he's done, one was Authors of the Impossible, and the other one is Mutants and Mystics. And both of those books figured heavily into, one figured heavily into comic book writers. The comic book writers of today are a lot of the real successful ones are steeped in magical practices and that they know what a magical practice is, but also that the things that they write end up happening to them in reality, often not as strong, often not as formulated as the comic, but still happen. And so his contention is that the creative force is creating these things. And there is the whole, not to throw another monkey wrench into the works here, but, how much different, and I know this is going to sound weird to a lot of people, but how much different is a planet that you've not been to? How is that different from Schrodinger's cat? There's life and there's not life. Until you get there and you bring it here, or you get there and you examine it yourself, it's both alive and not. It's both there and not. And I think this figures into Kripal's kind of theorem of things, is that we will write what we will find on Mars. We will write phenomena into our lives. We will write and we will author these things into existence. And so therefore, there's some kind of co-creative process between reality, ourselves, and something else. So we really need to have him on the program.
Or is the artistic excitement just an indicator of what we're about to discover, but that discovery has always been there?
And that could be too. It could be some kind of precog, yeah.
Tyler, how comfortable are you with these conversations?
Well, the idea of speculative fiction, driving science, or kind of like scientists start thinking about stuff, that's been around a long time, and actually the journal Nature includes a little speculative fiction article on every issue, every week. They have probably 750,000 word fiction, which is kind of interesting. And a lot of scientists will tell you that when they were kids, they were really hard-bitten science fiction readers, and so people love the ideas, and you turn the ideas over and you start messing around, and next thing you know, you're thinking like, "Whoa, yeah, we could maybe, how about if we tried this?" And part of the creative process is trying to put things together that have never been put together before. Right.
Well, and it sounds like Jeff Kripal's, what he's saying actually mirrors what you, Jeff, had said before about how you think the universe is. The farther out you go, you're going to start creating something to see.
Yeah. I mean, I used a quote from Jeff in the Project Core summary that I wrote up, and that quote is the paranormal is a story waking up to its author. And so the key word here is visualizing, being a creative process. That And this doesn't mean that it exclusively manifests a reality for the individual. It becomes a mass thing. And so when you were talking earlier about the random number event generators and all of that, I don't know that enough studies been done on those to really know, are they preemptively predicting something? Because they only seem to look backwards at those times, those kinds of things. Like there was a big thing at 9/11. There was a big thing at the tsunami. There was a big reaction to this and that. But those are always after the fact. I don't know that anyone has ever said, hey, we've got a huge spike in the random event similarities. We've got an anomaly here. We need to keep a close eye for the next 24 hours, because that's usually the window is 24 hours or a day. I don't know that anybody's ever done that. I've never read a story like that. As far as I know, that's only after the fact they go back and look at the numbers and go, see here. And so I don't know. I think there is definitely something to random event generators, that there's something to that. and only for the simple fact that I started using one in doing paranormal stuff, and I noticed that in certain haunted locations that I'm told about or that I've experienced stuff in, you do get different reactions out of them than you do at a normal place. So yet another thing that George Hansen told me about that's right. Shock.
This could really be for all three of us, I suppose. So either who wants to answer this, feel free. But if it's the artist is authoring the phenomenon, by way of Jeff Kripal's definition, then there's nothing real about it except what we put into it. There's no definition to it but what we put into it. And yet people like you and I and Tyler can look at other people, what they say they experience, or other researchers who, say what they're finding, and we can go, no, that doesn't ring true. That sounds like a con artist. That sounds like confabulation. So how can we do that? Why are we doing that if it sounds like it wouldn't apply, because it's all just sort of writing itself, right? How do we discern anything?
Well, what you're really asking is David Jacobs and people like him actually altering the phenomena by what they're putting out? As a co-created process, you're basically saying he's writing the phenomena into itself. And I would say, that we said that before, that yes, he has completely colored the phenomena itself. I believe that. Yeah, absolutely. I think do I think there are people who perceive certain things in their experience that is exactly what he is pushing? Yes. Yes.
But why do we have a feeling about that, I guess, is the question.
Well, because when you've experienced the raw bit of it, when you've seen the phenomena before he got a hold of it, when you see this whole thing, this is a whole nother show. Is it not fully realized in the UFO field yet that there were no flying saucers until someone said flying saucer?
Right.
Do people not realize that? I'm not sure most people do. If you don't, it's true. Go and look. It's absolutely 100% fact. Okay? The Rainier sighting started, and it was boomerang-shaped bat wing things. They were not flying saucers. He described them as the movement as saucers skimming across water. A reporter took that and said, flying saucers. All of a sudden, after that, we have disc-shaped craft that look like flying saucers. Okay? So, now fast forward to, anything. Well, I guess Betty and Barney Hill would be the next logical place to go. But there were experiences with these things going on long before that you can look at and you can say that is very strange stuff that doesn't make a lot of sense, i.e., aliens eating and serving pancakes. And then fast forward that up into the hybrids, the takeover, the paranoid delusional fantasies of an artist and a history professor, that then coagulates into some kind of real subjective, objective perspective from some experiencers. Does that happen? Yes. But I think we've all seen, or we've all looked long enough at this phenomenon to be able to see, when did that change come about? Oh yeah, right there. From that point forward, and I'd say it was about in the mid-'80s when this stuff really took root, that you start getting people talking about, I had my sperm taken, I had my ovum taken, they're making babies, and that level of absurdity there is no more absurd than aliens eating pancakes. Let's be clear about that. Because, it's like Terrence McKenna said, and you could tell he was talking about Bud Hopkins. And he said, I asked this man, how is it that when these women have these things extracted, that there's absolutely no trace whatsoever, internally or external, of the experience of having the baby removed? And his answer was, But Hopkins' answer was, they're really good at what they do. And you've got to laugh at that because, the disconnect between whatever it is being so far in advance of us, right? So it's like vastly superior to us. We know that bit. And then they're gonna work on you with knives and scalpels and all of that. No, it's ridiculous that they would even react to us or interact with us on a flesh on flesh level. That's not even up to our level of technology. Okay, so if you're going to talk about the effect that Jacobs and Hopkins and others like them have had on this phenomena, then yeah, but look how varied the phenomena is, and I would argue it's as varied as the people studying it. John Mack didn't get that.
But then why do we have an emotional reaction? See, this is the thing. It's I have the most vivid experience of my life with these alleged beings comes the night after I lose my virginity. when I'm super worried about if I ever had a girlfriend or a wife that I would bring this into their lives, and nothing happens on night one. I breathe a sigh of relief, and no, there they are. That's pretty ridiculous. Having a guy walk into your living room and have a sit-down chat with you is pretty ridiculous.
Yeah.
These are all ridiculous things. So why is it that two guys who have ridiculous things make judgments on other people? And I have the sense that we do it because we know something, that they're lying to themselves or lying, period. But I'm just wondering how it is. Do you have any handle on how it is that you intuit that? And we've talked about this in a different way, which is like New Age people who have the space brotherly happy thing. Maybe we need to reevaluate that they're interpreting it differently. But if it's all nonsense up and down, how do we say ours is less nonsensy? Where does that sense of it come from? That we've got the raw thing that we're looking at, and they've got some sort of filtered noise that they're dealing with.
You just answered your own question. We've got the experience that we recall directly. I mean, I've never had hypnosis to remember anything. And I remember this like any of these things, I remember them pretty vividly for the most part. Whereas, what they're putting out is this, my main problem is the hypnosis factor in all of that. That is inherently dangerous, inaccurate, ridiculous. But do I have any doubt that some people are experiencing that based on the reaction of the phenomena to that?
Right.
No, I have no doubt that some people are and are recalling that consciously. So there's that. I'll say that without a doubt.
So it's simply the self-awareness to say that all of these are facades, even the ones that we're experiencing are in some way a facade. That's what creates the sense that someone's telling the truth, is the self-awareness to be able to say that in the face of their own experience.
It's the willingness to, it's basically the willingness to say, I'm going to remember this outright without the aid of any hypnosis. And I think you also have to, again, these people who recall the operating table, the typical things, the scenario that we've talked about over and over and over, the typical alien abduction scenario, that by and large, this, Jeremy, that when we go and we talk to these people at conferences, and when you have a lucid discussion with somebody who's obviously not disturbed or right, you get these people and they're very astute and they're very calculated in how they relate their experience. When you get that, you don't get that kind of story. I would contend that the people who recall these textbook experiences, they are really very much the minority in this kind of study. They are just what gets popularized because that's what they can get their head around. This is the same reaction you got when you asked the question at the X conference, how do we know this is extraterrestrial? And God bless him, Bruce Maccabee said, well, if you're talking about something else, we can't really get our heads around that. We can really solve this extraterrestrial thing. We can resolve that into something we can talk about. And my answer to that was, well, why don't you resolve something else? This is all how this stuff kind of filters out. What people see in the media, what we get in the mainstream ufological realm is obviously not the bulk of what goes on. And the bulk of what goes on is weirder than anyone wants to hear about. People don't want the experiences that you and I talk about, not
right.
unless they're on a whole level, other level of understanding this past that facade of the alien doctor.
I just find it odd that, because I've been doing my show, The Experience, I've been talking about my own experiences, and, people make comments and they send me emails, and, we've all read the same sort of material about their experiences, and I judge them, and I go, oh, that sounds plausible. Oh, that sounds like dreams. Oh, that sounds like just wish fulfillment nonsense. And then I listen back to what I just said, and I go, wait a minute. How do I know? It sounds an awful lot like what I'm saying, except I still have that sense of a judge in me. Like, I do know right from wrong, but I just am wondering where I get that sense that I can do that.
Well, I don't know that I get that sense, but you could talk to somebody like, and I'm going to say the name, Kim Carlsberg. You could talk to her, and you can immediately know instinctively just by critical listening,
right,
that a tonnage of what she talks about is dream state stuff. And I'm sorry, that is as suspect to me as hypnosis is.
Right.
You're talking about a highly suggestible state where the mind is going 10 different directions and grabbing what it wants, and then the co-creative narrative with your own level of fantasy and or a therapist, quote unquote, like Jacobs or Hopkins, if you can call them that. So I think you've got easy hallmarks to tell and to hear someone's story and go, see, that sounds really a lot like the scenario that everybody's talking about. And while it might be happening, I have my doubts that you're not really looking deep enough into this phenomena. And I've said that to a number of people, that I believe what you're saying. I believe you think you were on the table when this happened. I ask you to look into that experience a little deeper and really ask yourself some profound questions. And I haven't had a huge amount of people come back to me, but I have had people come back to me and say, you're right. That I've thought about that, and that's not what happened. I've got these fragments of this, that, and the other. Isn't that bizarre? Why that? And they are weird things to tell about, beyond weird. And I go, see, that's what's valuable to me. That to me is what you're after. Because there's something in that.
Well,
there's
Tyler,
something,
What about you as an outsider who decides, okay, I'm going to work with Jeff and Jer, I'm going to befriend them, but not Kim Carlsberg? How do you decide, especially given that people in your world generally wouldn't bother to listen and see what the difference is between what we're saying and what other people are saying? I mean, you must hear a difference, and therefore here you are, right?
No.
Perfect.
Actually, it was infinitely simpler than that, Jeremy. And the simple fact of the matter is that you and Jeff are the only ones that would listen to me.
That's sad.
I'm not kidding you. That's how it began.
Yeah, but
and
after talking to us for a while, you'd eventually discard us if you thought we were full of nonsense. You'd be like, "Yeah, I gotta go."
No, it's. I'll just tell you that, notwithstanding Dr. Kreipel, most scientists will work on the philosophy of nullius in verba, on the word of no one. And what you do, what that really means is that you don't say, okay, your story, your experience, or whatever is nothing. I don't believe you. You say, okay, what was your experience, and what can we glean from that and learn from that, and go from there and begin to study it and examine it, compare it to others, find commonalities, exactly the kind of things we started with Project Core.
Are you friends with delusional people?
Probably.
Are Jeff and I delusional people?
I don't want to answer any more questions. But now, the thing is that
there's that fag thing we were talking about.
It's an approach, and the idea is that for whatever reason, you and Jeff have been compatible with asking questions and looking at things and perhaps doing more than a lot of other people would, but there aren't that many people in the paranormal field that would give me the time of day. And I trust me.
It's the anti-intellectualism. That's what that is. I believe that's what that is. Tyler, don't you, being an outsider to most of this stuff, what you've looked at, don't you see how inherently anti-intellectual that it is?
It certainly can be at times, yes. Yeah.
I mean, really, it's. I think the only reason that, and this is not to segregate us from any of this, but I think that when it comes to our kinds of discussions on this program, Jeremy's on The Experience, mine on Waypoint, and ours beforehand, we've been doing this a long time, right? And it's clear just by virtue of what Jeremy and I have seen the last time Paratopia was on the air, that the things that we say go out into this field and kind of percolate and end up in other kind of weird ways, or sometimes making people realize certain weird things, or things that normally weren't talked about. Well, my question is, these have been such obvious things. Why haven't they been talked about? And that's not to say we haven't done interesting things in the field. That's true, we have. But don't you feel like most of the people out there are out to believe something rather than questioning it? It's become their belief, not their question.
Yeah, I think you're right, and that doesn't take very long to figure that out.
Yeah.
And one of the things that really surprised me was there are people out there that had claimed trace evidence or important evidence, as kind of stuff that I could dig through. And I'm telling you, I think I mentioned this on your show before. The fastest way to turn most of these guys into mummies was to say, "I'll help you.
Mm-hmm.
Can I look at your stuff? I'll sign a non-disclosure agreement," and then nothing.
Yeah.
So there are a couple of exceptions. Ted Phillips and Frank Ficino,
mm-hmm.
and those guys were willing to send stuff and talk about things and examine, and whatever I told them, they listened to. And I said, you know what, I can't support this, but here's what we have, and this is what it tells us. And they just ate it up. They were just happy to let's find more. Let's find more. What else can you tell me? What else can we do?
They're asking a question.
Yeah, but that's rare. I was not prepared for this. Seriously, I thought most people wanted to approach it scientifically. Wow.
Well, it's the belief thing, but also I think you just helped me answer this question for myself, which is. I think the judgments that I personally make and the things that bother me are when people claim too much information. When they've got an answer, they know what it is, they know what those beings are, they know who they are, they know where they're from, they know why they're here, and yet these people's lives aren't any better and they haven't won a Nobel Prize. So,
no, I think that's important insight.
And when you realize that they possess no grandiose advantage of biology or mental capacities than you do.
Yes.
In fact, when you examine them closely, you find, no, they're actually a couple rungs down, the evolutionary ladder from yourself. This is not to say that we're geniuses by any stretch of the imagination.
And that's the part that hurts the most, come to think of it.
And this is the part that makes us, hey, you guys talk like fags and, all that. I mean, that's where that comes. That's why I made that comment, because, there's that fag thing we were talking about. It's that whole anti-intellectualism thing that goes on. This becomes, and I'd like to try, if we don't do anything else with this show, this go round, I'd like to do this. How do we define the field, and not segment it into the lunatic fringe, the people who think critically but act a completely different way? They talk a good game. How do we separate those from the Jacques Vallée's, the Richard Haynes, the George Hansons, hopefully the us in that equation? And then where are the people that are kind of in that middle ground, that really talk a great game and are really intelligent, but just aren't bringing a damn thing to the table? Mika Hanks, Ryan Sprague. I mean, where do these people pepper in the realm of all of that? This field, we call it the field. but there's so many different aspects of that field and so many different camps, so many different shades and colors. And then you've got the Greer nonsense, and you've got, you know, the people who believe with I went on Facebook the other day and I saw a post by a man whose profile picture looked really familiar to me. And I thought, I know who that is. So I click on this guy's picture and I come to this page for a Dr. Jonathan Reed. Does everybody remember Jonathan Reed?
I remember the name.
Back in the day, you know, this is a guy who claimed to have seen a UFO in the woods, took crystal clear daylight pictures of it, saw the alien. It killed his dog. He conked it on the head, I think, right? Not the story. And, you know, the UFO was like lifted off the internet, off the Groom Lake site. It was literally a graphic. It wasn't even a real photograph of anything. And he pasted it into the picture really poorly. No shadow, no reflected light, no reflected color, right? It was a complete crap story. Garbage. This guy is still at his story and has legions of followers who believe him. Dr. Reed, you're so brave. You're so brave. How do you do it? You know, how do you define people like that? Because are they even in the field? I think they're, you know, in another planet, in another world. They certainly don't live in the same reality that I do. So where do these people exist in this field? That's something we really got to kind of define out and say, well, what are these subsections and how do we define what they are? And then what value do they bring to this?
Well, and then there's the problem that Eric Ouellette and Colin Andrews have both spoken about, which is, are hoaxers influenced in some way to hoax? And so do you have to break it down that way too? Which ones are just full of crap, Greer, and which ones, such as crop circle makers, some of them feel as though they're guided to do what they're doing in some weird way.
Yeah.
But of course, Eric Ouellette's version of that is different than Colin Andrews'. Maybe we'll have to flesh that out too. I don't know. But I need to go teach an improv class.
I need to go play Star Wars Battlefront.
Tyler, what do you need to do?
Beta testing.
I got to finish Eric Ouellette's book.
Ah, perfect. Give us a full review. Oh, and when you're done with that, review Nick Redfern's book on bloodlines, because as of this recording, he's got that new book on some sort of rare blood type. We're not saying which one. That may indicate, an alien bloodline? And I seem to remember in Project Core, we never made that claim. Although we did find a possible blood anomaly, we were not able to draw the conclusion, therefore, that there are, ancient aliens in our blood?
Right.
How is that? How did he find that and we didn't? I know you didn't read the book. I know you can't give a full review, but I'm just curious if you have any
great
insight.
Accent, and he's bald, and he wears leather jackets. So that's how.
Wow. I think one thing to keep in mind is the idea of Rh negative being associated with paranormal experiences or abductions has been out there, and I kept trying to trace it back, and I got as far back as Steiger. And over the time that it had been out there, which, 40 years, I believe it's evolved, because it started out as a rare blood type, which I had interpreted as type AB, which is the rarest of the ABO system types, and maybe ABO negative, which would be a very small percentage. And then over time, that just kind of got morphed into the Rh negative. But I can't say that, I've done a exactly systematic and very careful survey of literature such as it is on this. So maybe Mr. Redfern has managed that.
Do tardigrades have Rh negative blood? Because
they do not.
Oh, darn it. We could have tied this all together. We're from Mars.
Sorry.
Oh, well. Well, next time. Yeah, maybe Nick covers it in the book. I haven't read it yet.
I'm pretty sure he doesn't, but...
Or anything. Okay. Well, Tyler Kokjohn, thank you so much for coming on Paratopia and chatting us up and teaching us as you are prone to do. Much appreciated.
Yes, sir.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
The Jeff, as always, nice to talk with you.
Yes, indeed. Likewise.
And we'll be back next episode with more Paratopia Oracle. Wait, what are we calling this thing?
I don't know. Let's table it.
Can we every episode, can we call it something different? Can we give it a different subtitle?
We can call it, I think Oracle is where we're going, though.
Next time on Paratopia Oracle. A very special.
It sounds a little bit too much like Paratopia Orifice.
Right.
So,
Well,
which maybe that's what it should be called, Orifice.
when in Rome.
Oh, God, no.
All right.